Hello there, Randal Schwartz here, back again with more tips and tricks and techniques from the world of Dart and Flutter. Today we're going to talk about something very important and very much on everyone's mind. Get lots of questions about this, lots of confusion, and all sorts of things like that. So I thought I'd do a short video about that. So let's call this Dart Null-Safety and how it affects Flutter. So first off, what is null-safety? Well, null is a special null value. It's distinct from every other value, so it always is not equal to everything else. And this has been around in Dart since the beginning, and it's been around in a lot of other languages. And what it means is that we can have an initial value for all the variables, at least in legacy Dart, an initial value for all the variables that is not the same as anything else. So in a bool would have a null value in it that was neither true nor false. So that's the legacy use of it. But it was also used as a meta value, like a value is not present. For example, a callback on a button has as a possibility null for that value, which indicates that there is no callback, meaning essentially the button is disabled and it takes on a disabled look to it as well. So in legacy Dart, that first thing was true. In modern Dart, it's not so much, and we need to start looking at what that actually means. Null has actually been around since day one of Dart, and I'm thinking that's the mid-2010s. I don't know the exact year. I know I was doing talks on Dart in 2015, I think it was, or maybe 2016. So way back in the day. Now, what's the implication of Dart? No, not what's the implication of Dart. What's the implication of null in Dart? There we go. I like that better. Is that whenever you try to call any method on it, except for a select few methods, it throws an exception. And that's in the same way that calling a method on an object that doesn't understand it throws an exception. You can't do something that you can't do. Now, except there's only a few things that a null can do. So it's really, really distinct from those. Now, this means that actually even calling a method on null is not bad. It's merely a throwable, catchable exception. So if you had a try-catch block, you could definitely catch that and do something alternate with it. Mostly send an email to the programmer saying, this broke, right, or wherever you want to do. And it's not like the old days, I remember, where dereferencing a null pointer led you off to wild, untamed memory, and you could end up doing all sorts of things, including crashing your entire computer. So we're much safer than that at this point. So in that sense, we are null safe. It's just that it throws an exception, and other things throw exceptions too. So let's contrast that a little bit by talking about NNBD. Non-Null-By-Default. This is the new phraseology for what the Dart team has been doing for a few, I'm going to say almost 2 years, but at least some number of months. They spent many periods of time bringing non-null-by-default into Dart. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute, but I'm going to start first with distinguishing when is Dart NNBD. It's any time the modern Dart is acting like 2.12.0 or greater. What do I mean acting like? I'll get to that in a moment. But to begin with, it needs the actual Dart binary that's 2.12.0 or greater. And this was first available to the general public as in Flutter 2.0 stable. That's the one that was announced at Flutter Engage, and a lot of you downloaded it, I know, because I got all sorts of confusion about a non-null by default as a result. Okay, so the one that was announced at Flutter Engage. Now, those of us on the dev side, we've had access to it for even a year before that, pretty much. So, and that was to get our packages up to grade with the new Dart, but that's another part of the story. So what is legacy Dart? Because I'll be using that term a lot in the next few minutes. And what it is what we had before NNBD, or it's modern Dart in legacy mode. So legacy Dart means the Dart we had all the way back to probably the beginning of 2.0. I would even argue that in some ways Dart 1.0 was also the same flavor of legacy Dart. But it's also modern Dart running in legacy mode. Now, modern Dart, the Darts that have come out in the last 6 months or so for the general population, but running in legacy mode. What do I mean by that? Dart chooses whether to operate in modern mode or legacy mode by looking at the pubspec.yaml file and looking at the Dart min SDK version. That's probably the first number or the second number that you'll see scanning down from the top of the pubspec. It's the one that gives the range of 2 dot something up to 3. So you've seen that many, many times. I won't need to point that out. But the number in front is the important one, the min SDK. If that number is greater than 2.12.0, we are going to get modern Dart acting as modern Dart using the technologies that we'll see in the next few slides. Okay, if it's any less than 2.12, and I prefer 2.10 just because that's the most recent one that's not 2.12, if we get 2.10 there, then modern Dart, even though it has the ability, will then backtrack and act just like legacy Dart, which means it will have legacy null-safety, and it will have legacy syntax. We're going to talk in a minute about the things that the syntax changes on, but legacy null-safety merely means that we are catching all of our null dereferencing at runtime, not at compile time. So that's a big, important difference. Okay? Now, again, I want to make this point clear. The Dart version, as you see it, Dart -- version, does not matter, except that if it's not 2.12 or greater, you'll never be in modern Dart mode. You'll only be in legacy Dart mode. But even if you see 2.13, or now lately it's also 2.14 as a possibility, you are running that. You may still be running that Dart in legacy mode. It depends on the pub spec, not on the baked-in version of Dart. So please try to keep those two separate. What matters as far as Dart null-safety or not is the pub spec version. The pub spec version. Now, what's the difference between these two Darts? Well, modern Dart is going to give us things like language features. The @required annotation becomes the required keyword for named parameters that are not optional. So they're required. The late operation allows us to initialize a variable as long as it's initialized before its first use. I won't go much into these features just because there's so much else on that and it's not important to this conversation right now. You'll find plenty of information out there, including something I will reference at the end of the slides. Exclamation mark, which is asserting to the compiler that even though it thinks it might be null, you promise it never will be, basically moving a compile time check over to runtime. And question mark here is the annotation on types. If we say string question mark, it means it's a nullable string, just like it was in legacy times. If we don't put the question mark there, it is a non-nullable string. So again, that's a brief description of those. No time to show great details on that. Not important to this conversation. Okay, so modern Dart brings those 4 features. Modern Dart brings functionality. such that non-nullable types forbid the null values. You cannot shove a null into a non-nullable variable. Just doesn't fit. A completely separate type now. And also compiler analysis. So for example, the compiler, if it can recognize that nullable data is trying to get by all the blocks and works and stuff, and actually gets into a non-nullable variable, that'd be a bad idea. And if it can recognize that at compile time, it will block you appropriately. Also, if it can recognize that because of some choices you've made, like if statements or things like that, that it won't ever be null by the time it reaches a certain place, it will often say, do a type promotion, which means it will say, yes, this says it's nullable, but I don't believe it'll ever have a null at this point. The compiler can say that. And you can also use exclamation mark to promise that, but you don't need to once that's true. Okay, now, all of these features, though, modern Dart, only come into place, once again, if you enable it in the pub spec. And here's the thing that people get really confused. Flutter 2 does not mandate using non-nullable Dart, Dart 2.12. Does not mandate using that. You can still continue to run legacy projects with Flutter 2. Your projects are safe. Please stop saying on Stack Overflow, on Reddit, on the Slacks, on Discord, everywhere you can, stop saying Flutter 2 broke my code, and especially stop saying Flutter 2 broke my code, I need to know how to downgrade to Flutter 1. Got that just this morning. So stop that, because that is not true. What broke your code is something we'll talk about in a few minutes. So please install Flutter 2. Flutter 2 does not require Dart 2.12. It will run with your whatever version of Dart you have listed in your pub spec. Flutter 2, of course, is an improvement over previous ones. It's got fewer bugs, a lot more features, few more features. Some of the features were renamed, but they're deprecated. They're not discontinued. So they're marked in your IDE as you should probably change this, but they don't stop working. In particular, I think around the snack bar and around some of the button types, you will get warnings. And some of the things in the theme, they were more unified, and this was a good chance to move that forward. Now, also installing Flutter 2 gives you, and let me point out the word, opportunity. An opportunity to migrate your code to NNBD Modern Dart. Not a mandate, an opportunity. Because that is a separate step. And the separate step before you take it, always, always, always git commit, git push. Get your current release out so you can always roll back to it. I have heard of people not doing that and then being very sad. So don't be sad. So let's talk a little bit about this migration step, which is how we're going to get our code base into being non-null by default to take advantage of all the new things that this modern language upgrade has given us. There's the URL. It's a link to the Dart dev site, and easy to find. If you just type Dart migration guide, it's the first hit. Amazingly enough, Dart.dev and Flutter.dev have really good Google SEO. I wonder how that worked out. Anyway, so you can go to those sites with ease. So it will tell you the following steps. Do not leave out any of these steps. Do not do them out of order. This is where people get in trouble. Follow the roadmap. First thing you need to do is install Flutter 2.0 because you have to get the modern Dart to do some of the remaining steps. Now again, as I've said now 5 or 6 times, installing Flutter 2 does not mean your project is now running with Dart 2.12 with NNBD Dart. It does not mean that. The pub spec still rules. If it says 2.10 or even 2.7 or 2.6 or whatever, that's the version you're running, because 2.12 and later know how to act like 2.10 and earlier. That's not a problem. Okay. So first, Flutter 2.0, always. Gonna need that anyway, so might as well get it going. In big capital letters, do not upgrade anything without the following step. This is what so many people leave out. You need to verify that the packages you recursively use, you depend on and they depend on, have null-safe versions in the pub. Okay? Very, very important. And you do this by writing Dart pub outdated -mode equals null-safety. Okay? So that's the command to run. And if that command will run through and look at all the dependencies and all they that depend on and so on. If that comes out good, it'll give you a nice little book report at the end. If that comes out good, you're ready to go to the next step. But no. If you see any mistake there, stop. We'll talk about what to do at that point in another couple slides. Okay. If everything there has an upgrade path, in other words, if there are no negative remarks from that, then you can upgrade your dependencies. You do that with Dart pub upgrade, null-safety, Dart pub get. Do not worry about writing any of this stuff down. You just follow these exact same steps listed on the migration guide, the URL at the top of the slide. Okay. When you have done all that and the dust is settled, I would make another git commit just in case we have to roll something else back that we're about to do. And you say, upgrade your code, Dart migrate. Dart migrate is a new tool. So is the outdated null-safety thing. If you didn't do the first step of installing Flutter 2, you won't have the rest of this. So again, all the steps here are necessary in the order listed. Okay? Dart migrate is a wonderful tool. It goes through and it analyzes your entire code base. And it's not just looking for regular expressions. No, this thing is a full on-topic analyzer. It's using the same tools that the compiler itself uses. And it figures out combinations of things that would not be the proper way to do it in Non-Null-By-Default Dart. So it generates a change list internally, and then it starts doing the deed interactively. It's going to handle most of the migration automatically. Now, if for any reason during this part of the process something goes wrong, the Dart team insists that you give them feedback because they want this to be a painless part of the process and they want this to be an accurate part of the process. Very committed to this. Okay? So, it'll chunk through and it'll say we need a question mark here, we need an exclamation mark there. At required becomes required. A lot of the ones are pretty obvious that it makes the changes for, but it's done it by a detailed analysis of the code flow in your system. You can interactively view the changes and, of course, why they were selected and necessary. Now, you may disagree with some of them. For example, you may realize that the reason this variable is nullable is because you forgot to initialize it with a useful value at the beginning of the variable's cycle, in which case you can ignore what it's suggesting. Go in with your IDE, opt out of the change, go in with your IDE, and then fix it yourself, and then inform the migration tool, leave it up running in a corner somewhere, and watch the migration tool and tell the migration tool reanalyze. Push a button and it restarts its process again. This tool, by the way, the migrate tool, is running because you've pointed a browser at a URL that got printed out earlier. And the migration tool, I'm told, is running in Flutter Web. So if you wanted a good use case for Flutter Web, this is actually quite pretty looking and cool looking. Okay? So once this step is done and you have completed all the things the analysis tool says, I either got to ignore or I got to fix or you fixed it for me, whatever the analyzer tool gets to say, we're done. We should be done with the migration. As a final step of this process, the migration tool automatically upgrades your Dart min SDK to 212. That's the only place that value should be changed. Do not do this by hand, because if you've done the migration properly, then this is all done for you. And it's also an indication that it needs to be done. So don't change anything to 2.12 on your own. You will end up in a world of hurt. Follow the steps that are listed here, as many as they may seem. Must do these steps. Now, in that earlier test where you were looking to make sure all of the things you depend on were already migrated, you might have come up with a snag. So what do you do if the packages haven't been migrated that you depend on? Well, the early advice was wait. Just wait. Wait. Okay. In other words, people will probably fix them. Have the same demands from everybody, probably going to get fixed. But my personal rule, as well as the rule of some others that are around me, have said, if it's still not null safe by the time you're watching this in pub and has not been migrated to non-null-by-default, it is probably abandoned, sadly. That does happen to software. People get enthusiastic about something or are working on a project, and then they're no longer working on their project, and things just get left alone. So keep that in mind as we continue this part of the conversation. To try to mitigate that, you can file an issue against their repo. Or maybe you see an existing issue that says, hey, this needs to be null migrated. Who's working on it? And work together with those people to help it happen quicker. Okay, hopefully. You can also say, well, okay, nobody seems to care about this, but I do, because I like this package. You can always fork a repo and make the changes yourself. Make the changes yourself. Now, in your pubspec.yaml, you can take the original package name and point it using either the path specifier or the get specifier to point it at a different source. You don't need the pub for everything. You just need it for everything that you end up publishing yourself into the pub. But if you're just using something, then you don't need that. You don't need that to fix yet. However, when you do that, I'm sure all of us would appreciate if you put in a pull request so that others can also benefit. Because if you like the package and you've been using the package and other people are probably liking and using the package, everybody benefits if there's now a null-safe version and everybody's using it. Sadly, the last option is also available and might be necessary, I'm saying. Switch to a different package. There are a lot of similar packages that do similar things on the pub now. The pub is pretty mature in that respect. And sometimes people abandon packages, and then someone else comes along and wants to pick up development on it, and they create necessarily a different named package. They have to, because the namespace on pub is essentially owned by the first publisher to publish a package with that name. So that has to be a slightly different name. I've seen this at least a dozen times on pub entries that I've come across. You can also just write one of your own packages too. Not that hard. I mean, you're coding already. You're coding an application. Why not code a package too? Okay. So we're almost done. Let's talk a little bit about Flutter 2.2 and its impact on this whole process. So Flutter 2.2 got released as correlated with Google I/O 2021. Okay, so just a little while ago, as I tape this. So the nice thing about Flutter 2.2 coming out is it's just better. And it's still not necessary to use modern Dart. You can still use legacy Dart. Legacy projects can remain legacy. You just get to use those cooler, newer improvements to the Flutter SDK. Now, it is unclear when the final Flutter release that allows legacy Dart is going to drop out of the people that publish the SDKs. We don't know yet, but there will be a time when Flutter 2.4, 2.6, I don't know when, 2.8, when it no longer supports legacy Dart. But for now it does. So, migrate soon. You know, you still have some leeway. Don't get down to the wire and be stuck on Flutter 2.2, for example, because you didn't upgrade your Dart version yet. There is one minor change. Flutter Create, the tooling that builds the basic counter app. You may be familiar with the counter app. If you're listening to this, you've probably seen the counter app a dozen times, 100 times. Erased it all. How many times? I think the Flutter counter app has the record for the most number of lines deleted from it collectively, and exceeds the number of lines deleted from it collectively by far over the largest lines added to any large application. So, poor little counter app, but it gets deleted. I delete it immediately, put my own framework in there. By the way, the very good Ventures people, VJV people, have a really nice starter kit, and I understand coming soon, the Flutter Create command will soon have templates and things like that. But mostly speculation until it's published. I don't know exactly what's going on with all that. Okay, so what does that mean? The Flutter Create command now creates a pub spec that says Dart 2.12. Yes, it is non-null-by-default by default. NNBD, which is what Twiki used to say on Buck Rogers. NNBD. Okay, now, the 6 old people in my audience got that joke. Nobody else did, but it's still my joke. All right. Now, the great thing about this still, though, is that you can immediately change the min SDK in the 2.12 it generates to, say, 2.10 and still get the old behavior. The only thing that won't work is that crazy counter app because it's got question marks for keys. All right. That's not going to work in old behavior. So just delete it all anyway. It's the counter app. You know what it says. Make your own. So, just about done. Let's talk about places to go for more information. There's, of course, the official Dart migration guide that I mentioned a bit earlier. And again, if you just say Dart migration guide, those 3 keywords, it'll be first on Google's search. Imagine that. A Google search pointing at a Google website. Okay. This is another one right near it in the same area on, I think by Bob Nystrom, one of the smart people around the Dart environment, talking about null-safety, talking about how it was introduced, why it was introduced, the features you get from it, the specifics about those 4 syntax things that I mentioned, required, question mark, exclamation mark, and now I'm blanking on what the 4th one is. Oh yeah, late. So, on those 4 things, right, it will tell you specifically about that and why to use it and what it's all about. There's also, beyond what I'm showing here, there are tons of videos and blog posts and things like that on all this. This is nothing secret anywhere. And my other favorite one is from Flutter Engage, where Flutter 2 introduced Dart non-null-by-default and included a nice 30 to 40 minute talk on null migration that even shows the person running it, sorry I forgot his name, I'm so embarrassed, who went through and even showed overwriting some of the things that the migration tool was suggesting. So really good talk. I recommend that highly. I also have a Dart and Flutter channel. Some of you are subscribers to it because that's how you got this particular video. But all you have to type in again, Randal, Schwartz, Dart, Flutter. I have really good SEO for the spelling of my name and for this channel. So check that out. Occasional random tips and tricks, nothing fancy. Mostly I'm answering FAQs. So if I see the same question more than 3 or 4 times, it becomes something for me to talk about. And if I have like 60 things in that list that I haven't gotten to yet. So I'll keep coming out as fast as I got time to do it. And finally, if you have questions about any of this stuff, use the community support. If you go to flutter.dev/community, there's about, there's a Discord, there's a Gitter, there's Slack, a couple Slacks actually. There's Stack Overflow, the way to tag your questions there. There's Reddit, a few Reddit groups. There's lots and lots of ways to get your questions answered. And by the way, I'm on all of those, so it's real easy to find me. Probably almost 18 hours a day, sadly sometimes. So if you have questions, you can ask me at all of those places as well. So that's what I had to say about Dart safety and how it applies to Flutter. I hope you enjoyed this, and because this is going on my channel, also please thumbs up all the right things, bell the right things, star the right things. You know the drill. I don't want to repeat it from everybody else, but do that. Do this stuff like that. I'll be watching the comments, of course, for this article, but also hang out on the Flutter community stuff. I'll be there. Thanks a lot, and until next time, have yourself a good Flutter day and Dart day.